Mein Führer.
Mit welchen Kräften, mein Führer?
Die 9. Armee ist nach Norden hin bewegungsunfähig. Die Feindkräfte übersteigen unsere Mannschaften um ein Zehnfaches.
Aber, mein Führer, die 12. Armee marschiert nach Westen, Richtung Elbe. Dann entblößen wir die Westfront.
Mein Führer? Mein Führer, wenn es in Berlin zur Schlacht kommt, wir werden kämpfen bis zum letzten Mann. Aber es sind noch über 3 Millionen Zivilisten in der Stadt. Die müssen evakuiert werden. Mein Führer, bei allem gebotenen Respekt gestatten Sie die Frage, was soll aus den Frauen und Kindern werden, den Tausenden von Verletzten und den Alten?
Stößt auf Stahnsdorf vor.
Mein Führer, ich kann nicht zulassen, dass die Soldaten, die für Sie ver... Mein Führer, was Sie da sagen, ist ungeheuerlich.
Maximal 1 bis 2 Tage. Der besten Offiziersjahrgänge gefallen, mein Führer. Ich gebe Ihnen mein Ehrenwort als Offizier.
Der Führer kann nicht als ruhmloser Flüchtling vom Parkett der Weltgeschichte verschwinden.
Gilt das auch für das Regierungsviertel?
Denken Sie an die Tausende von Verwundeten. Wir können nichts mehr für Sie tun, mein Führer.
Aber dafür sind die jungen Leute doch da. Die Logik der Frau.
Ich will jetzt sofort wissen, ob die Gesamtlage es wahrscheinlich macht, dass Wenck noch eingreifen kann.
Es ist unwahrscheinlich, dass Wenck mit seinen wenigen Verbänden der Roten Armee...
Wieso behaupten Sie, ein Angriff Wenck sei unwahrscheinlich?
Wenck hat der Roten Armee absolut nichts entgegenzusetzen!
Wenn das so ist, warum sagen Sie das nicht dem Führer? Sind wir denn alle verrückt geworden?
Glauben Sie im Ernst, der Führer weiß das nicht selbst? Aber er wird niemals kapitulieren. Und damit Sie es nur wissen, wir auch nicht. Ich habe das einmal mitgemacht. Das reicht!
Kommen Sie, ich muss hier raus.
World War II was a complicated era of human history. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And perhaps more importantly, what was the Pope, who was right in the middle of it all, supposed to do to better the Catholic faith? That and more tonight on The Edge.
You muted?
Dad, I think you're
I
muted.
think you're muted.
It worked until we had to get in. That's
darn it!
There it is.
So close.
So you wouldn't hear me laughing there. So welcome everybody to On the Edge. I am your host Dan Davis, and tonight we have a very special episode. It's so special that Kevin is joining us from Germany at 1 a.m. Thank you, Kevin. And tonight we're going to talk about World War II and Hitler, and I kind of want to make a couple of caveats or a couple of notices up front, and just say that we are committed here to trying to present a fair and balanced look at World War II, at Adolf Hitler, most especially at Pope Pius XII. I think we may be a little bit biased in Pope Pius XII's favor. And basically what we want to do is kind of go through some history of World War II, history of who Hitler was, especially, and then really look deeply into the question of Pope Pius XII, and was he, as is said in modern secular society, was he Hitler's Pope? And so, without further ado, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do some quick introductions. I think you probably know us all by now. I'm Dan. I am the host of the show here and a contributor over at Catholic Family Podcast. So, William?
William Davis, youngest of the troop. I'm here. I'm usually here except when I'm not. And I gotta say, with that first clip, I actually thought that was like unedited, like the actual, because I didn't know what it was from. So I was like, wait. It took me a minute. I was like, wait, what's going on here? What? Very good, but
well done.
The movie's fantastic, by the way. It's called Downfall. It's in German, obviously, but it's a really good movie. It's really it's kind of, as the scene portrays, it's really intense and claustrophobic, and it really gives I think a good look at Hitler's last days, whatever you believe, however you believe he ended. We're pretty sure his days in that Berlin bunker were pretty stressful. I'm Kevin. I've been around here for a while on the podcast, and I lived for 9 years in Germany. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. That's a big reason why I stayed up till 1 o'clock in a freezing cold hut to be able to do this podcast. So if my internet is an entirely different question, do you guys hear me okay?
We hear you okay. The picture's a little scratchy, at least from where I am. So but go ahead and fire away.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, we hear you fine. Yeah. So I mean, if anybody's listening, and by the way, I want to say real quickly, number one is that Kevin put out the word, and it started that we're going to have the show tonight, and it looked like it started bouncing around some kind of like neo-Nazi type individuals. So we got to kind of keep an eye on the chat. We will definitely put you on timeout. We're going to definitely we'll block you if need be. We want to keep this wholesome, and we really are trying to, but I'm telling you right now, we are not going down the Hitler was a hero rabbit trail. That's just not at all. Although we will kind of call out a lot of the successes, because he did have a lot of successes. And then second of all, welcome to Catholic Family Podcast, as well as the Traditionalists on YouTube, and those of you watching on X. And then for the first time tonight, we are also broadcasting on Rumble. So nice to see everybody, and hopefully our numbers will kind of reflect that we're on four platforms now. So Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and start with you and let you kind of talk a little bit about kind of the real Hitler, who he was, how he came to power, and what kind of mess he made in Europe.
Yeah, I got to say, first of all, I'm not a historian. I tried to get on my buddy Christian, who is a German historian, but it's 1 o'clock here, so that didn't work. But maybe next time. Yeah, and I think I want to put down some preconceived issues. I know these comments are going to come pretty soon, and I don't buy the story given to the numbers, all of the that we're told, etc. That the Nazis did, that Hitler was the worst person of all time. I don't believe all of that. I do think that Stalin and Mao Zedong and others, that certainly have the death toll higher than he. And I also think clearly that the Allies were also not the good guys. Certainly not when they dropped the atomic bombs, and not when they firebombed Dresden, etc. I think Winston Churchill is a cruel villain, and FDR a little better in my mind, but certainly not a hero. So, guys, that's not the argument here. The argument is not that the Allies were the heroes, and the argument is not that the Nazis. YouTube might ban us for saying these words, but I think we're not going to be too pro, so we'll see. But it's not that we're trying to say that they were not doing some protection against the Soviets, but
evil versus evil.
Yeah, exactly. It's evil versus evil. And so if you go back, so it all starts, and I'm sure William can back me up here, Dad. I'm sure it's pretty basic history. Back after World War I, Germany lost the war, and they got severely punished for it. I mean, really dragged through the mud economically, societally. They got, I think it was half $500 billion, I think it was, in debt they had to pay to France, which was something that it would take something like, it's something just absurd. They would never pay it off. It was like, hey guys, you lost, and now you're going to be paying forever. And so they were really put in the doghouse and suffered. And this was also, of course, during, shortly thereafter, you had the market crash, you had the Great Depression, which also happened in Europe. And so Germany was really in a rough place. And so it's not that surprising that after being put under the heel of Europe for having lost a war that they didn't, I mean, they lost it, but it's not like they necessarily started it. I mean, I guess you could, that was a very complicated beginning of the war. There's a really good book called the Guns of August, which goes into deep detail about the beginning of World War I. Also very interesting. But I think it's really interesting how Hitler came to power, because in Germany, again, they were downtrodden. They're poor as all get out. They're in debt. They had no hope and no future, but they were still a country of geniuses and people who worked really hard. And so really what happened was, you had a lot of decadence in the 1920s. The Weimar Republic was a mess. They were in the roaring 20s. You kind of had a weird hierarchy of I don't know, decadence and whatnot. But you also had this infiltration of communism. And so the Bolsheviks, who are, at least there's a theory that many of the Bolsheviks who took over even parts of Bavaria were Jewish Bolsheviks. And they had just seen what happened in 1917 in Russia with the Bolsheviks. So there was a great fear of communism. And they truly feared that, the communists were going to revolt and rise up and overthrow the governments or murder a bunch of people, which was a pretty fair fear. And so when Hitler came about, he's kind of a strange person. We'll talk about him in a little bit. I think we're talking about him before the show, that he actually does kind of have some comparisons to Donald Trump. He was this very charismatic leader who his real genius was understanding the people. He just could put his finger on it. He could say, this is what Germans want, this is need, and this is what I'm going to give them. And he gave it to them. And what's really interesting is you watch his rise in the 1920s and 30s, is that as he rose, part of why he rose is he promised his people all of these things. He promised them economic, growth. He promised them security. He got them out of these terrible deals. He said, we're not going to pay back the debt. We're going to get out of the disarmament deals. And as he's doing this, all these treaties that happened after World War I, and he just pretty much said, no, not. And what's amazing is that if you look at in Britain and these other countries in Europe, they just kind of stood by and were like, okay, yeah, okay, you go for it, Mr. Hitler, and they just let him do it. So I don't know if William or Dad, you have any comments up to that point, because I mean it's a pretty incredible part of history, and you really see why it happened, why it was allowed to happen, why the Germans needed something.
Well, yeah, and also the start of World War II itself. While of course you could say Germany and the Nazis were the aggressors, because they were the ones who first crossed the border into Poland. Because the reason that they did it, they were trying to retake the Danzig corridor, which was a ethnically and historically Germanic. It was German. It was a German-speaking area that wanted to return to Germany, much like some parts of Ukraine, today's conflict. And the reason that Poland refused to negotiate with Hitler to return that, which it seemed like originally they were going to, is because Britain and France gave a hollow promise of military support to Poland. It was a non-aggression guarantee, as it were. They Britain and France said to Poland, yeah, if Hitler attacks you, then we have your backs no matter what. Trust us, bro. And so Poland refused to even come to the negotiating table with Germany and with Hitler. And it was due to this that Hitler, or the Ribbentrop-Molotov pact was made, wherein pretty much the Soviet Union and Germany divvied up Poland and the Baltic states between each other. And that was the direct cause of World War II. Now, whether or not Hitler would have continued to, aggressively expand past historically Germanic lands, we don't know. But, possibly yes, maybe even probably yes. But as things happened, it was Britain's and France's very, very poorly thought out and probably intentionally made empty promise to Poland to have their backs that caused Germany to invade Poland, thus issuing in World War II. There's a great, great book called Hitler, Churchill, and the Unnecessary War by former Senator Pat Buchanan. Very, very well written, very good book that goes into a lot of those details why so many people don't understand and don't know today, they aren't taught why World War II actually started, why the first shots were fired. And it was largely due to, of course, Hitler's aggression, of course, but also the Allies prodding him into it by backing him into a diplomatic and economic corner with Poland.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being very generous to Hitler, because I mean, if you look, let's go back, because if you look at in 1932, this is where I really, a point where I really look at 1932. They went and they said they went to Austria and they said, okay, tell you what, Austria, you know what? You're not Austria anymore. You're actually Germany. And they're like, no, we're Austria. And they had this back and forth, and then pretty much Hitler's like, no, you're going to be part of Germany or else. And then they murdered Dollfuss, who was a really great Catholic chancellor of Austria. And Hitler, oh, whoops, just some random Nazis just accidentally, murdered him. And that was, to me, the beginning of really being able to see truly who he was, which is crazy that in the end, in 1939, he was still getting Time Man of the Year. But here, I wanted to read this real quickly, guys, from a book that I highly recommend as well. It's called Church of Spies by Mark Riebling. And this is a very well-researched book. Go ahead, Will.
In answer to a couple of comments, duly noted. I've cleaned my flag. I used it as a dinner, as a tablecloth. So duly noted. I might get on it, but if not, then oh well. I mean, who am I trying to impress? There aren't that many Welsh fanatics out there who will lynch me for not ironing my Welsh flag. But also, I'm not familiar with the scholarship of David Irving. At least it doesn't ring a bell immediately.
So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to read. Oh, go ahead, Dad. Yeah.
I think the one thing I would add. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Dad. You add first. And
I'm off on a totally different tangent.
Go for it.
Okay.
I'll come back to it.
Okay. Totally different tangent here. I had not realized until recently, just a few days ago, I think it was, that if you've ever seen any of Hitler's art, you remember, I mean, it's kind of well known that he was an art student, and he was trying to get into the one of the famous art schools that was turned down, and comedians will take that and say, here goes World War II. But I saw some of his art recently, and he was a phenomenal artist. Oh my goodness. I mean, he did landscapes, he did castles, he did a lot of castles. He did pictures of our Blessed Mother and our Lord. And and I know, Kevin, you're going to talk about, or at least we talked offline a little bit about how he was kind of nutty from his early days. It's not like one of the things, and I'll let you do it, and then maybe get back to this point, that I've always kind of had the impression that he was a great leader, fairly good man, not necessarily Catholic, and he got midway through his term and just went nuts. And it sounds like from stuff you've said that that's really not even the case.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's kind of an enigma, I think. I mean, even at the beginning days, the government that was in place when he pretty much overthrew them, I mean, they really didn't know what to think of him. They're like, who is this pathetic little weasel type of a thing? But he had the voice, or the ear of the people. He just understood. He was a great speaker. He understood how to use the words that the people wanted to hear. He was a populist. And that's something that I think really needs to be remembered about Hitler, is that, again, when you start talking about, most people today say, okay, he was a Nazi, which means he's far right. It's like, well, no. I mean,
No.
he was the head of the National Socialist Party. So it's kind of funny because, like, what is National Socialism? And I've listened to podcasts about this, and I still don't really understand it because what it comes down to, I think, was he was a populist, but he was a guy who was an opportunist. He was just like, hey, I'm going to say and do whatever it takes to gain power. And I think, again, I think he just understood what that took. And so economically, he was more fascist, but socially, he was more socialistic. And when it came to the point of, oh, I'm fighting communism, and then he joined with Russia, right before he invaded Poland. So
kind of the ultimate might makes right kind of, Machiavellian ideals brought to its logical conclusion of, if I come out of this better, then the means be darned.
Right. Well, and his generals were trying to assassinate him from the beginning. Again, read the book Church of Spies. There were a group of German generals, the general of intelligence, the top general whose name escapes me.
Brauschwitz, was it?
I don't remember. But he was the head of intelligence, and he was trying to sneak in generals and colonels and all sorts of people to assassinate Hitler with the approval of the church. So that's another topic. We'll maybe have on Father McKenna to talk about that one, because it's pretty interesting. If you can you assassinate a tyrant? But it's interesting. So it's another thing when we get into this topic again of the church being Catholic Church working with the Nazis. It's absolutely absurd. I mean, look at the guy. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie. It's late, guys. Valkyrie with
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise. Yeah, and that's so Count von Stauffenberg was a great Catholic, an amazing Catholic. I think a heroic Catholic, and he was someone who, he brought the bomb in and tried to blow up Hitler. And the Catholic Church was the one thing really standing in the way of the entire Nazi, which is it started out kind of mildly evil, but honestly not even that mild. If you guys don't mind, I just want to read a little bit of this, because it all kind of connects together, because I want everyone there. So we have not had too many comments, which is interesting, but I know there are people listening to this who've watched videos and they're like, oh yeah, the Nazis are the good guys. Well, listen to this. So this is from Church of Spies. Stunned by Hitler's victory, the Pope, this was Pius XI at the time, tried to work with him. At 6 p.m. by the bells of St. Peter's on 20th of July, 1933, Cardinal Bocelli, who became Pope Pius XII, initiated a concordat with the Reich, building on the agreement he had negotiated with Prussia. The treaty guaranteed Catholic rights throughout Germany, but any Vatican illusions about Hitler disappeared on the 30th of June, so that's 10 days later, 1934. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a year later, on the night of long knives. So while the purging of party rivals, etc., they executed a bunch of people. I'm skipping a little bit. They beat to death a pious Catholic Dr. Fritz Gerlich, editor of the anti-Hitler magazine Straight Path, shot the national director of the Catholic Youth Sports Association, Adalbert Probst. They broke the spine and put 3 bullets in the heart of Father Bernhard Stempfle, who had at first backed Hitler and then denounced him. By late 1936, the Church and Reich seemed on course for a showdown, etc., etc., etc. Let me just read the last paragraph. The horizon darkened further in 1939 as Bocelli became Pope. Despite an apparent detente, threats and pressures swirled. The election of Bocelli is not welcomed in Germany, since he has always been hostile to National Socialism, Berlin declared, adding ominously, in the end, worldviews are decided by weapons. There are so many quotes. I mean, it's endless, the quotes of how much Hitler hated the church and how much the church worked to overthrow Hitler. And I'll let you guys comment and then I can continue.
Yeah, and I think it's also forgotten that the Nazis pretty much instituted their own religion. The SS under Himmler. They melded kind of bits and pieces of Catholicism along with paganism and like Nordic paganism, and fused it together into an Aryan, and Nazi Aryan religion. that was, essentially in total worship of the state, and it never really took off because you can't just invent a state religion and have, undo centuries of culture, within a couple of years, even though no matter how hard they tried, through the likes of the propaganda minister, Goebbels. Am I pronouncing that? Is it Goebbels?
Goebbels.
Goebbels, umlaut. Goebbels. Sorry, Germans out there. But it's also, it's one of those things that the Germans tried to completely circumvent Catholicism when they weren't actively trying to destroy Catholicism in the territories they held.
Well, it's a great point. So in 1937, the encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, so which translates to with burning concern, again, that was published by Pope Pius XI, but there are certainly rumors, or it's likely it was written by Pius XII, or would be Pius XII Pacelli. It was written in German, so keep that in mind. There's some people like, well, it's kind of vague. It's like, guys, it was written in German, not in Latin, so it's pretty clear who they're talking about. In this encyclical, the Pope criticized the exaltation of the state above God in the persecution of the church in Germany. The encyclical was read in all German parishes on Palm Sunday in 1937, and let's just say Hitler was not pleased, and that's where, again, after that happened. So he, they read this, and this was after, and so Hitler goes crazy, and he's got all sorts of quotes saying, he would have preferred that Germany was Muslim rather than Catholic, and the Catholics were a thorn in his side, and that he hated Pacelli, he hated the Pope, he wanted to destroy the church, and then what also happened, and so then Hitler goes and persecutes and starts killing Catholics and putting them in a camp, which I have visited, called Dachau, which is outside of Munich, where you can see the pictures of the priests. So all you guys, oh, Hitler didn't ever do anything. Yeah, you can go and see the pictures of the priests in the camp. So yeah, I'm pretty sure he did that. That's real. And this is thousands of people ended up dying. Now, this was not an extermination camp, but what had happened was it was a work camp that was supposed to hold something like 2,000 people. And they packed in something like, I think it was like, I don't know, 50,000. I don't have the numbers in, top of my head, but so many people that they couldn't feed them. They're sleeping outside. So they're dying of exposure. They're dying of disease. And so pretty much they were sent there to die. And this is a lot of Catholics because, well, a lot of the Jews were being sent to Poland. So this was prisoners, political prisoners, because the political prisoners were put in prison because they were priests who were giving pamphlets from the Pope to be read against Hitler. So again, anyone who still has this idea that Hitler and the Pope were good buddies, wake up, everybody. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me take on one here, a question. I think I had planned to talk about this in a little bit more depth later, not this book, but this concept. And he's asking, American Reform's asking, what does the panel make of the 1937 book from Archbishop Hudal, entitled The Foundations of National Socialism, in which the author argues to make a bridge between the German Reich and the RCC. I'm sure that kind of thing happened. I'm sure that there was plenty of things to build on. But it being a 1937 book, I think this was boy, what was that, Kevin? Right about the worst of the times of the breakup between the Reich and
yeah,
church.
Well, I mean, so 37, and again, everyone's got to remember that this is still a couple decades after the Bolsheviks, and I don't think anyone's the fear that everyone had. First of all, that the monarchies had been, completely overthrown by World War I. So you had a lot of the governments were all kind of new and all kind of scared because they had just overthrown governments, and so they're all kind of like, oh boy, someone would come do it to us. And the Bolsheviks had just gone and murdered everybody. So I think there was actual fear, and especially I think the church was like, hey, this is bad. This is communism is evil. They condemned it over and over and over, and so they knew this was a real fear. So I think when they saw these other forms of government coming against communism, I think there was a natural feeling of like, okay, we could work with this. The form of government is not directly anti-Catholic. It's not directly anti-human, the form of government that is. But obviously, eventually, pretty quickly after this, it became very clear that, okay, if you think National Socialism could work, it's not going to work with Hitler. It's just not.
Yeah.
I mean, that became abundantly clear. I don't know, honestly, what I'm confused by after the chapter I just read, and that was a tiny little portion of it. They went and just murdered a bunch of Catholics. I don't quite understand how there was still even this talk. Like that kind of baffles me. Like if Trump just went and just murdered a bunch of Catholics, and then we're just still kind of like, well, it could work. It could be good. I don't under that. That's the kind of stuff I don't get.
Let me give you a little bit of background okay. So there's one of the things that I'm absolutely derelict in this. So when we were in Spokane about a year and a half ago now, we sat down and talked with Father Casimir Pistorius about his parents' story, because they're from remind me.
Lithuania.
Lithuania, right, which is right between Russia and Germany, and so they're good Catholics, and his parents and they had both militaries coming in on them, and they knew that they had to leave. They knew they had to get out of there, but for them, and I think the people that were around them, they considered the Russians to be the greater threat to them than the Germans. And so one of these days we'll get this process, and we're going to post it up on Catholic Family Podcast. But basically the story goes that his parents literally were walking through the fields towards Germany at the same time some of the German soldiers who were retreating from Lithuania were walking almost in parallel with them, and they ended up basically escaping through parts of Germany and then to the United States. And so I to this point about making a bridge between the German Reich and the RCC, I think it might have been just kind of an act of desperation, to the point that we saw that, or the people who were in the middle of it saw that communism was the greater threat of the two. And maybe at that point didn't even realize how bad a threat Hitler was.
And even to an extent, Churchill also despised the communists. But after Hitler declared war on Great Britain and then on Russia, Churchill very quickly about-faced and famously said, if Hitler, when questioned why he would support the communists, he said, if Hitler were to invade hell, I'd at least give Satan a favorable voice in the House of Commons. Something, roughly paraphrased. But, everyone who wasn't in communist-held lands knew that the communists were an incredibly big threat. I mean, just look at the body count. Look at the body count, where I think it's estimated upwards of 50 million people were killed in the Stalinist regime, whether that's through the Holodomor starvation in the Ukraine, through the ethnic cleansings in places like Kazakhstan, and also the purging of the military, which is why Hitler was able to almost destroy Russia, is because Stalin completely gutted, quite literally, his military, and everyone who was even remotely possibly could be perceived as a threat to the status quo. In the same veins as Mao Zedong had an even bigger death count. Hitler did not have as many. He did not kill, exterminate, and genocide as many people as Stalin and Mao Zedong, or even people like Ho Chi Minh or Pol Pot. They who were also genociders on a horrendous scale, but Hitler is seen as the big bad because he lost. Now, of course, I'm not saying this to defend Hitler. He was still absolutely a homicidal maniac who was he didn't just exterminate Jews, but also Catholics, and any dissidents. I mean, in the same vein as Stalin and Mao Zedong, is kind of what you see with that era of totalitarianism.
Yeah, if Germany had won the war, and it looked for a long time like they were going to, certainly the American intervention helped. But I think if Germany had won the war, had scaled back their plans for world domination, and had taken things in a slow manner and won, we would be looking at Hitler today as a liberator. You know, we probably would have buried all the stuff about the Jews. And he would have been seen as the man who destroyed communism. And so, yeah, I think that you're right, William, that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the communists won the war. They write the history.
Yeah. The victors wrote the history books. And so Hitler was, presented as literally Satan, and then Trump as literally Hitler later on. But Stalin and also, Mao Zedong just let off the hook. Almost completely let off the hook by history. Of course, I mean, it's not like anyone still considers them as the good guys, but they, in all rights, should be considered more evil and worse than Hitler. Although Hitler was still absolutely terrible.
Right.
But he doesn't hold that much of a candle to, especially in a Catholic perspective, that Stalin does, because Stalin also had the systematic destruction of the church and of Catholics and Christians, and the eradication of religion in general, much more thoroughly than Hitler did. Although, I mean, who knows if Hitler had won and been in power for as long as, say, Stalin was? Who knows what history would have unfolded? But that's not the history that unfolded. And so now we get our current narrative.
So, Kevin, do you want to take this one? I would have to think that Hitler was the Reich was religion, and I think that was the Catholic faith a competitor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was the one thing that stood up against him. Again, I mean, it's very clear that the Protestants just bowed down to him, and really the ones who stood up when he started to do bad things. I mean, when Hitler wrote, I don't know what you call it, a law, or put into effect that hospitals should start to murder people with mental disabilities, there was one person really publicly who stood up, and that was the Archbishop of, I can't keep names straight in my head. I think that was Sant Gallen, the Bishop Sant Gallen. Someone help me out in the chat. But anyway, there was one archbishop in Germany who stood up and they call him, actually, I think I have it here. That's right. He's called the Wolf, the Lion of Munster. So it was Munster, and his name was Cardinal Clemens August von Gallen. And so he condemned Nazi ideology, and he was the one who really stood up against the Aktien T4 euthanasia program, which was to murder people with mental disabilities. Again, our lovely hero Hitler, true Catholic. So, these are things that aren't debated. So it's again, people, I understand, and you're right, William. I totally agree with you, and I agree that the history was written by communists and Jews. And I think that's totally true, and I think a lot of it's fabricated. But again, people putting Hitler on a pedestal is like, the guy was murdering people with mental disabilities. I mean, what are we doing here? How on earth can we possibly put him up on any good level? I mean, he was a terrible person. And this was back in the mid 1930s. This is not like, oh, well, then he didn't, in Poland, and it was all Britain, and no, he was a horrible person. And again, the one fighting him the strongest was Pacelli. And Pacelli knew, because Pacelli had been the papal nuncio since 1917, I believe.
Yeah, 1920 to 1930 of Germany.
Is that what it? Okay, yeah.
I think
thanks.
so.
And his German was perfect, obviously, and he knew and loved the culture, and he was, again, and that's why Hitler said, why did it have to be this guy? And he said multiple times, my greatest enemy is the Catholic Church. So, we can question why that was, but it was not just clergy. Someone mentioned in the comment that people in Dachau, they were priests because of their sexual crimes. I'm sorry, were some YouTube video that you saw by some guy named George in the basement? I mean, sorry, what is that from? They're political prisoners.
Yeah, and something also.
Sorry, Dad, you had a.
Something people also forget is that Hitler. There was an attempt to kidnap the Pope by Hitler, by the Germans. They tried to kidnap from the Vatican. They tried to kidnap Pope Pius XII. He also called Pope Pius XII the pro-Jewish Pope as part of his propaganda. But so I mean, the whole notion that Pope Pius XII was friendly with Hitler, or that Hitler tried to use Pope Pius XII for propaganda is ridiculous. And as I will probably get into later, and I have written down some bullet points on that, is from the communists. This stemmed from the communists.
Yeah, and one of the things that I had kind of wanted to take on here as a little bit of a side journey, and kind of talk about it. So Kevin, you're asking, where did this impression of Hitler come from? And I think that it's basically been, we have always had a skewed view of, I think, World War II. One of the reasons we want to have the show tonight is I think we've always had kind of a skewed view of World War II, of Hitler, and now I think and he's been painted as a comic book bad guy, and because of that, I think that now today we've got kind of a backlash on it, and now you're seeing basically. Okay, so let me go way back to the beginning, and let's see if I can open this and kind of show. If you look at some of the early movies about World War II, right? This is The Great Escape. Right after World War II, there were a ton of different movies that featured the Nazis as bad guys, and you look at the Sound of Music. And that was another one where, of course, they were escaping the Nazis, and this was at least in the aftermath of the war, and because it was the aftermath of the war, I think you were getting a little bit more of a real look at things, how the Nazis actually were. But then I think as time went on, you had I don't know if it's going to come up. Yeah, you had a number of movies like The Rocketeer here, and like of course the famous one is Raiders of the Lost Ark, and all the Indiana Jones movies, and basically with these movies, increasingly over the course of time, you had the Nazis becoming this comic book. Basically, the bad guys. They're two-dimensional. They're just they were everywhere. They were evil. They spoke German, and really just like the Russians had been in the Cold War afterwards. During this time, to be German was almost like a blight in and of itself. And the the war had basically given us a very two-dimensional idea of things. So then I think what happened was, now about 2013 or so, a movie came out, and was called The Greatest Story Never Told. And this is one where you started to see the idea that people were starting to figure out at this point that they were being lied to by our government, that 9/11 was what the JFK assassination wasn't what the government said it was. 9/11 wasn't. And so they started, the millennials, I think, it started this, and they started asking the question, okay, so were we told the truth about World War II and Hitler? And so this movie comes out, The Greatest Story Never Told, and what this was basically the exact opposite of all of the brainwashing that we had gotten, that presented Nazi Germany as this comic book cutout bad guy. Basically, they went through and they took all of the good of Hitler and presented it in a single movie, and it really started to basically boomerang with the millennials and now into Gen Z, where they're re-looking at things, and they're saying, whoa, wait a minute, Hitler fought the communists. Hitler, he's on camera smiling a lot, and he did this, and he brought his economy back from the brink. And he burned pornography books. When you see the book burnings of the Nazis, we think of them as probably, they were burning propaganda, Christian propaganda. No, they were burning pornography and evil books, just like we probably could do here in America today. And so what that's done is, it's basically with your younger generation, I think, with your millennials and with your Gen Z is it's created this scary little rabbit hole that basically says Hitler was a hero, and he's just been misportrayed by, generations of Americans, of Westerners. And that's kind of how we've gotten to today. So that's, I think, a little bit of three-dimensionality. It's kind of a crazy history, but I think that it has taken our society and given us a really weird view of what actually went on.
I also think it's become hip. It's become punk rock to think that Hitler was the good guy in a way. You're being counterculture. You're being, you're being awake. You're not being deceived anymore if you think things like Hitler was the good guy. If you think that Hitler was the good guy, and dare I say things like, Sandy Hook didn't happen, things like this, things I get people into a lot of trouble for saying, because they say, okay, we were lied to about A, B, and C, so that necessitates that D, E, and F were also lies.
Right.
Just straight up. And now you have people who the line of people who don't think about the lies they're told, that Hitler is, cartoon evil, global domination tyrant, evil. And the same kind of people who also believe, just without any kind of real research, that, Hitler was good guy. He knew Jews were real problem and communists were real problem. And he got rid of them and made Germany strong. I think you have both kinds of just low. They watch a YouTube video. They watch a YouTube video breaking down of why this happened. And now it's, oh yeah, is a good point. And that's as far as their research and thought form goes. And then they go and preach to the choir on X and on their social media platforms, going all out, espousing their new ideology.
Yeah, well, and I think, again, I think part of what I always kind of come back to is, okay, so when you say these good things about Hitler, say, okay, he was anti-abortion. Yes, that is good. That is a good thing. No one's going to complain about that. That's awesome. But he was anti-abortion because he believed in creating children and trying to get an Aryan race in order to conquer the world. So, yes, it's good that he was anti-abortion, but the guy had some crazy ideas, and who does this guy keep saying that he's an atheist? Okay, even if you're right, what's your point? Are you saying, oh, he's an atheist, thus he must be good? I don't understand what your point is even. So, James, thanks for your comment. But I mean, in the end, as you guys say, I mean, history, it's important to understand what actually happened. And I think we'll probably never know what actually happened, right? Because as we've said, the truth is somewhere that hasn't been told. And we'll never know the full story of it. But you can still take parts of it and just say, okay, what can we all agree on actually happened? And unless you're saying everyone lied, the church lied, the cardinal lied, Hitler was murdering people with mental disabilities. So can Hitler be a good guy? No. Now, you can also say, okay, our presidents are for abortion, at least to a point. So can we really love Trump? No, of course not. He can never be a hero because he murders or is for the murder of children. So it's I don't know if it's an equal evil, but I think that's the same thing we have to look at now. We can't also pull the blinds over our eyes for Hitler or for our own times. Evil is evil. I think we need to recognize that, not tout it. Again, and I think that's it's an interesting thing that you can watch one video, the video you showed, Dad, and it kind of changes the entire perception of the story and just going, as you say, boomeranging back to the opposite direction.
Right. And so I think that, of course, we called this episode here Pope Pius XII and was he Hitler's Pope? And I knew we were going to go on a while talking about the real, three-dimensional Hitler, and he was a bad guy and all that kind of stuff, and wanted to get that kind of out of the way as a foundation first. But really, I think the main thing we wanted to talk about really was Pope Pius XII. And William, I think that we've got this pretty well teed up for you.
Yeah. So again, as just starting from the beginning, no one during World War II thought that that Pope Pius XII was Hitler's pope. Got a ghost in my room knocking over things. Anyway, my train of thought's a runaway. But it was in, I believe it was 1940. Where is it? 1944, where the Izvestia, the Communist Party paper centered in Moscow, came out with an article condemning Pope Pius XII as Hitler's pope. And the next day, ironically, the New York Times came out refuting that claim, supporting Pope Pius XII in his endeavors to save the Jews and to save everyone, to save lives from Hitler. That was the first salvo of Hitler's pope. The idea of Hitler's pope centered in Moscow, not from anyone else, not from anywhere else but communist Russia. Then shortly afterwards, the propaganda agents in Moscow made a book, pretty much, I think it's called like Dozia or something like that. I don't remember the Russian title for it, but it was essentially Hitler's pope, condemning the Catholic Church for its complicity in the murdering of Jews and for helping Hitler and for being pro-Nazi. And that was, again, shut down, ironically enough, by the likes of Moshe Sharett, the second prime minister of the state of Israel, by Golda Meir, another prime minister of Israel, by, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it correctly, Chaim Weizmann, the first Israeli president, praised Pope Pius XII in his defense and support of the Jews during World War II and of his humanitarian aid and constant calls and efforts for peace during and before, especially before, but also during World War II. An Israeli diplomat in the 1960s, or no, earlier than that, Pinchas Lapide, might be right, says that 700,000 Jews or more were saved by Pius XII. Then again, I don't know where he's getting that number from, but that's where he got that number.
There were only 6 million in all of Europe, so
yeah, so all 6 million Jews got killed with 700,000 more left to spare. Right. So I don't know where he's getting those numbers, but according to a Israeli diplomat in the early 1950s and 60s, Pope Pius XII was responsible for saving countless thousands of Jews during World War II. Again, in 1935, Pope Pius XII sent an open letter to Cologne, where he called the Nazis false prophets with the pride of Lucifer. He was, and also people claim that, there's that photo of Pope Pius XII meeting Hitler or, meeting Nazis when Pope Pius XII, when he was still Eugenio Pacelli, was nuncio to Germany until 1929, which was before Hitler came to power, before Hitler fully came to power. So Hitler and Pope Pius XII never met. And that photo right there is actually a photo of Pope Pius XII leaving from a meeting with, I think, heads of state during the Weimar Republic. So not Nazis, not Hitler. Pope Pius XII and Hitler never met. William,
they have Nazi helmets, so I mean. Well,
yeah, so they were always the Nazi helmets. Hitler came to power, and the Nazi helmets, bam, instantly. Right, exactly. It's one of those things. They see. You see certain.
But so I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's so funny because I think that's exactly Dad's point of Hollywoodizing it, right? So in our minds, we see a picture, and we see those helmets. They're like, I think that. I see the helmet. I'm like, that's the bad guys. That's the Nazis. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's pretty stupid. Those helmets are probably around since the 1920s. I mean, see how our brains work, though.
Yeah. I mean, now on a side note, were those helmets or the World War I spiked helmets better? Those spike helmets,
the spiked
they're
ones
cool.
were those are pretty
cool.
trippy, yeah.
Can also double as a projectile. Anyways, it was so after the first salvos of communist propaganda in the mid 1940s and 1950s, that were shut down mostly. The idea of Pope Pius XII being a Nazi sympathizer or Hitler's Pope went away for the most part until 1958, or no, it was very shortly after his death. Where did I have that? There's a book called The Deputy, written in 1963 by Rolf Hochhuth. Hochhuth.
Hochhuth. Oh no, Hochhuth.
Hochhuth. Which is called The Deputy, which was then later put to a screenplay, which was called Hitler's Pope, and that was very well received in places like Broadway and London, and widely acclaimed. And it was later adapted into a movie called Amen, and it is pretty much exposing the secret Catholic and Vatican conspiracies to help Hitler and to sell out the Jews, and the Pope was in conspiracy with Hitler, all that nonsense that had been until then very soundly refuted. But of course, by that time, the church was no longer the church, and the Vatican was no longer the Vatican. There's no longer the church. This is 1963. This is after Pope Pius XII died, and so there was suddenly no longer, and also there was no one personally there to refute the charges, and so they stuck. And this time around, they stuck and were what, and that it's from that really the Deputy in 1963, where the modern idea of Hitler's Pope comes from. That's kind of the germ, and also and then from there that spawned many, supposedly documentarian books. One called Hitler's Pope: Secret History of Pope Pius XII in 1999 by John Cornwell, who goes through all of these, again, debunked and often refuted claims of sympathizing with Hitler and not helping the Jews, when, according to, I mentioned the first two prime ministers of Israel personally thanking Pope Pius XII for his efforts, his humanitarian efforts, and his personal efforts to save the Jews during World War II. There's also many accounts by Sister Pascal, the author of His Humble Servant. I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but she was an assistant to Pope Pius XII, stemming back from his days as nuncio to Germany, and was one of his assistants throughout his papacy. And she, in her memoirs, could not speak highly enough of Pope Pius XII during World War II. He managed to get the Americans, after the Americans took over Italy, to send aid free of charge. So to freely send aid from the Vatican to all corners of Europe that were afflicted by the war, and he personally. And he also was responsible for the shipping and the production and the gifting of many spiritual goods like monstrances, chalices, chasubles, mass kits, to devastated parts of Germany, as well as coffee. He forewent. How did I don't know the term, the past tense of that. He gave up coffee so that more coffee could be sent that was shipped from Brazil could be sent to the war-ravaged parts of France, Germany, and Europe, and all throughout Christendom. And his personal efforts, his letters, his personal endorsements and exhortations resulted in many lives being saved. He established an intelligence community, in which I can't say, and I can't remember the Italian name for it, but it was an Italian intelligence, a Vatican intelligence agency that would try to get information from missing soldiers to their families, so that many families found out through the Pope, through the Vatican intelligence agency, that their family members were still alive, or that their family members were, had been interned in prison camps, and also was instrumental in helping reunite families as well. So, I mean, all of these well documented by his opponents too, by the natural enemies of the Catholics, the Jews, refuting these absolutely false and disgusting claims that Pope Pius XII was somehow Hitler's pope because, I don't know, he didn't do enough. He didn't go the extra mile to outright condemn Nazism, and he was somehow complicit in helping the Jew, or helping Hitler round up Jews. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense.
Well, it's interesting because I'm reading now a book that's excellent so far. I'm about halfway through, about Edmund Campion. I think he's a blessed, right? Blessed Edmund Campion, who was a martyr under who Elizabeth I killed him. And it goes into a bit of the history. And it's interesting that I never realized, or remembered at least, that during that, the whole issues of the Protestant Catholic, back and forth in England, that when it really came to a head was when Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth. And I don't think he put what do you call that? I cannot think. Anyway, he put a halt on all the sacraments in England. I don't think he did that. Like, that was more of a medieval thing, but he excommunicated her, and that allowed all Catholics to disobey everything and to revolt against her. And I think there was still, and it didn't really go well. So it's interesting, like the commentary from the book by Evelyn Waugh, probably. It's actually a man, but his name's Evelyn, which is kind of a weird thing, but it's a really good book. And it kind of commentary is like, we can't guess the intentions of Pope Pius V, and he thinks they were very holy, and there must have been, he was a very holy pope, a saintly pope, obviously he's a saint. But the effect was really not great for the worldly good of the Catholics in England. It was bad. I mean, it ended up being really bad because it was like, because Cecil, who was he was pretty much the head of the government, he was like, oh boy, okay, so pretty much now you're Catholic and now you're a revolutionary, so you better stop being Catholic or we're going to.
Yeah, and I'll get.
I think that kind of history. Okay, I got to be a little careful here. And there's the story too that Pius what started out being pretty strong, and his bishops were the ones, and the cardinals, archbishops, whoever in Germany were the ones who said, "Your Holiness, please stop. This is going to turn sour for us if you keep keep kind of talking out against Nazism. We need to try to handle it here."
Yeah, and I think that's an aspect of this that really the church, for its better good, needs to stay out of politics as much as it can. Now, it will take ideologies and it will extract the evil from the ideologies and condemn those. But typically, you got to be very careful about condemning governments. Another example I think about is the Cristeros in Mexico in the early 1900s, and basically they were down there and under a brutal communist dictatorship government, and I think part of it was because the church did not get the true story on it, but basically the church did not throw its full weight and go to war with Mexico because Mexico had gone communist. The Catholic Church is not a political entity and is not meant to take sides in wars. And I think that what Pope Pius XII had to do in World War II is he was looking out for the faithful. He was looking out for the church. And I think to a large degree, he had to be very, very careful about how even being perceived as taking sides in the whole thing, because he had Catholics on both sides. And so, I mean, it was just a very, very complicated thing for him.
Yeah. And I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole of, a separation between church and state, but because I mean, after the Protestant revolt and the Enlightenment, you had the true separation of church and state, where the state, I mean, there's always been separation, but for a long time, the church had a lot of power in what the state did. It had a lot of say in what, Catholic Europe did. They called crusades, and, Christian nations went to war. But then again, that ceased, and I don't think we'll ever see that again. We'll never see another Saint Louis IX of France. And so now, having to deal with these modern times, with especially with such a vast amount of Catholics that are spread throughout the world, imagine, if Pope Pius XII were to come out and do some of the actions that Saint Pius V did, or that earlier popes did, that Pope Urban II did, calling the First Crusade. If Pope Pius XII had come out and said, yeah, the Nazis are evil, we condemn them absolutely, Christian, Catholics should revolt, and we are placing Germany under interdict, et cetera, as previous popes had done, you would have seen the mass execution of Catholics. You would have seen a heyday of persecutions against the church, against the Catholics, especially in Germany. And so that's so people come out and say Pope Pius XII was a pro-Nazi pope because he didn't come out and explicitly condemn the Nazis. He didn't tell the Catholics to you should not be part of this. You should leave. You should take up arms. You should take up arms against Hitler because he's unjust. If he'd done that, the ramifications would have been tremendous. I mean, there's also I can't get the exact numbers, but I believe this was 1942, where an anti-Nazi bull was promoted by some Danish bishops, or maybe even a Danish archbishop. I don't remember exactly where or who. And Hitler, in response to this, rounded up and massacred thousands of Catholics in Denmark as reprisals. I mean, Hitler and his reprisals are infamous. And so imagine if Pius XII had come out and done this on an international level. Imagine what Hitler would have done in response. That's why you can't playing Monday morning quarterbacking all this and saying it was hindsight. Pope Pius XII should have done this. Pope Pius XII should have done that. He should have been more anti-Hitler in this regard, or he should have been more anti-Jew or whatever in this regard. It's that we weren't him. We weren't back then. We didn't have to deal with the same political landscape that he did. And so it's very, very disingenuous to to come back and sanctimoniously say, oh, he was evil and he was wrong and he was fascist leaning because he did this and did that, when we weren't him, we weren't there.
And here's something even crazier, I think, to consider, William, is that not only was he dealing with World War II and with communists and Nazis and everything, but he was also dealing with the infiltration of his own church. And he knew that he had modernists, basically growing in number, that I think he even said, after me comes the deluge. He knew that basically the church's days as a force for good, as a public entity that people could trust, was on its way out, because his own church, and then to the extent that you had modernists that were taking over, you couldn't have known who they were. You could have, you maybe have had a roundtable meeting with 10 different cardinals or bishops or whatever it was, and half of them were modernists, and you never would have known. So the whole thing was just stealth, and it was a cancer that was growing in the church. So he was dealing with that as well. I mean, I think sometimes I love Pope Pius XII. I think he's just an incredibly holy man, and what he went through in his papacy and what he had to deal with was, I mean, maybe not unique in all of history, but it was certainly unique in modern times.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and well, for one thing, him being the last true pope, and also having dealt with everything he dealt with. I mean, just in a 39 to 58, so a 19-year span, the proclamations he promoted, that he declared, and the advances in the faith that he made, and doctrine, and also in reforms like fixing, some people might say not fixing, but fixing the Holy Week ceremonies, and all of that while dealing with little things like World War II, little things like communism, and fascism and modernism, and
boomers,
nuclear world.
And I think
that's another thing
that
was the beginning of. I mean, I guess, boy, who would have had it by 58? You would have surely had, obviously, Russia and America. And I mean, that whole threat of nuclear war. Can you imagine? And I think that, the Pope Pius X died almost like of a broken heart because of World War I. He saw all these things he had tried to fight against. I think he saw the modernism still coming. He saw the breakout of war, and you do have to imagine how that was for Pius XII. Again, as you said, that what he was going through is just hard to even fathom, and then just to see what happened immediately after he died, right? I mean, I think that's what's so kind of fascinating too, is you compare what he lived through, but then he dies, and the world just goes bonkers, just absolutely insane. I mean, and totally insane. And again, even normal, worldly people would agree with that. I mean, the early mid 60s, everything changes. Everything totally goes on its head. You have Vatican II, you have really the loss of faith, you have sexual revolution, you have boomers. Feminism, you have boomers. Boomers were a big part of it, big part of it. And it's so fascinating because, again, I think people, you see people here, he was a friend of the Protestants and all these things. It's like, could he have done things better? Maybe, probably, I don't know. As William said, it's like, I mean, we're armchair quarterbacking a pope. I mean, is that really the right thing to be doing? But even so, maybe he did some things that I would have done differently. Personally, the 55 changes, I would rather leave them, but he's a pope. He had a reason that he did them. And I think that, again, if you just see what happened, he died and the world goes crazy. That just gives me so much more respect for him. Because it's like, I mean, he was, as the Pope, holding together the entire culture, the entire world. Yeah. And then it just goes, and then he dies, and then you elect a false Pope, and it goes, boom, gone. It's just everything gone. It's crazy.
I mean, in record time, literally. I mean, after him, the deluge, the dam burst, and the timbers of society fell, just like bam, within a decade, a decade of him being gone. So you can complain all you want of he did this wrong and he did that wrong, but imagine how bad it was with him. Now imagine it 5 years after him. You judge a man not by the world he created, but by the world left after him. The world he left us was still something to be hopeful for. And then after he was gone, we saw just how quickly everything he'd worked so hard to preserve fell apart. I mean, you have. All right, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that it's one of the things that is one of the periods of time that fascinates me the most, and I think as we start to eventually, years down the road, whenever it is after I retire, we really start to dive into the Indefectible series that we want to do and really, really document these things, how the Catholic Church survived the Great Apostasy. But that early time right after, from 1958 roughly until about, let's say, 1970 or so, is I just literally can't get my brain around how did these errors get pushed in? How did the Vatican council get called when it shouldn't have? How did the schemas get switched and nobody said anything? How did every single bishop sign off on the documents? How did the basically artistic and all of your cultural norms, all of your art, your movies, everything just went completely to heck? I mean, it was so holistic that the way things fell apart, that it's just it blows your mind. And I think that certainly what Pope Pius XII was holding back in 1958 was probably a big part of it. He was holding it back, and it just launched after he was gone. But yeah, the depth and the breadth of how we fell apart over the next 10 to 12 years after he died in 1958 is just, I think it's one of the more fascinating parts of this series that we're wanting to do.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that gets into a little bit, you touched on, how this could have happened. Have you read the book AA 1025? AA 1025?
Heard of
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
It's a now there are those who speculate that it is that it's false. But the story is that a communist, literally he was raised, I think he might have been raised a Catholic, but he turned communist and made it his mission to infiltrate the church. So he became a priest. He ended up like murdering another priest, and getting into a seminary, I think in America. And he was saying he made it his utmost goal to be the most exemplary priest, and to be, the perfect wolf in sheep's clothing. And the scary part, AA 1025 means 1025. So he was the 1025th, anti-apostle, because that's what AA anti-apostle 1025. And he ended up getting killed by being hit by a bus, and the nurse hit by a car, and a nurse who was taking care of him in his last days found his diary. And that's where the book comes from. And so, you get, even if that isn't true, like that individual story, the idea of it very, very much is, in that the wolves in sheep's clothing, the communists, infiltrated the church so well and so perfectly that you couldn't tell friend from foe. You couldn't tell modernist from true Catholic. And then once you have, even if it was only 20%, and that's being pretty generous too, because I doubt it was much more than 15 to 20% of your clerics. After Pope Pius XII died, and they weasel Roncalli into the papacy, the camouflage comes off, and they reveal themselves for the utter modernists they are, and they start wreaking their havoc. And that's why I think you saw the complete destruction that we saw in such a quick time. And there's also kind of in my mind, kind of a shock and awe campaign where things just changed so quickly. You didn't have time to wrap your head around it. You didn't have time to question things because things were changing so quickly. And it has been very carefully organized in advance by the Freemasons, through the communists and by the communists.
Yeah,
I wonder sometimes.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry, Dad. Yeah, I just wonder sometimes too. I mean, I just wonder with these generations, if they just seen so much that they were just tired of it, tired of fighting. I really wonder. It is so curious, because obviously you had these bad guys who did, and I agree with that. I think that's totally true and makes sense. But what happened to everybody else? Like that? Why did everybody sign the Vatican II documents? I mean, obviously they trusted. Okay, this is a true council, so we're going to sign it because it came from the council. I understand that, but there seemed to be so little fight. How many like you can name the fighters during the 1960s? Father Arriaga, Lefebvre was way later. So I mean, there's like 5 of them. I mean, Father DePaul. Where is everyone? And I think maybe were they just all just tired? Were they just like, you know, they've been through so much in life that they just didn't want to fight it. I just don't get it, really.
I'll give you one story that I think is instructive anyway. So I don't know if you're familiar at all with the with Monsignor Joseph Pfeiffer, not the Bishop Pfeiffer that we know obviously today, but no, Fenton, not Pfeiffer, Fenton, Monsignor.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a Father Francis Fenton, who was one of the original Sedevacant contests, and then there's a Monsignor Joseph Fenton, who was one of the leading conservatives. Who's one of the top voices at Vatican II of the conservatives, and his diaries are available on Novus Ordo Watch, and they're really amazing to read through. I've read through them, and basically he talked as a sedevacantist. He's like, I can't believe what they're doing to my church. I don't feel like we're going to survive. And they did this and this and this, and it was as if, you know, these letters are almost as if Mario had written them, and they're so salient and so true to what we see today. But then he was preparing to write a book about Vatican II and was going to call a lot of this stuff out. And then he went and he met with Paul VI, and after that meeting, he was a different man, and everything was good, and he went along with everything, and he just kind of stepped down from all that. I've heard the same. I heard an interview done, and in fact, this was kind of a crazy interview. It's the night that George Bergoglio was elected to the Novus Ordo papacy. It was an interview that was being done by, I think it was Bishop Sanborn, Father Cicada, and there would have been one more, probably Bishop Dolan, and the three of them were talking through all this, and they told the story of Archbishop Lefebvre, that basically Archbishop Lefebvre had also come out and basically been a sedevacantist, and then he was called to Rome and had a meeting with JP2 at the time. And they had the hug. They call it the hug. And he had the hug. And after that, he was a different man. And, you know, you hear these stories about, and I don't know if there's, I don't know what the whole thing is, but you hear a story, similar story. This may be urban legend about Archbishop Sheen, that before he left for the council, he told his staff that if I come back with a different theology, don't listen to me. He knew it was coming in terms of modernism, and he bit on the modernist apple, and you know, whatever happened to him, he turned completely modernist. It boggles the mind. I can't, I mean, for every Father Gomar de Pau who saw it, called it out, and actually left, there was 100 or 1,000 who didn't.
Yeah, I think a large part of that would be, I mean, as much as we put priests and bishops on pedestals, you know, as we should, as their station dictates, that doesn't mean they were all heroes. And the threat of ostracism, of being essentially deposed and having your pensions cut, not getting any more money, and swimming against the tide, you're separated your very few heroes from your flock from your masses of not even necessarily cowards. I mean, very much cowards, but also just conformists. It's very easy to go with the tide. It's very easy to go with the current, especially when your Pope is in that current. I mean, it takes a very, very special kind of hero to kick against that tide, to kick against that current, and to stand up for the truth in these situations. And that's why, you know, I think so very few did, because, and also maybe the laxity, the church had grown lax, at least the clergy had grown lax, and so there wasn't a whole lot of true conviction. There wasn't a whole lot of true piety and humility needed to stand up against the false church when it lifted its ugly head.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think they call it the greatest generation, right? I just think that's again, it's just a fascinating thing. I don't really understand it. I think it's fascinating thought, to just consider why. Yeah, why was that? Why was that generation? That they would show up to a football stadium, for 90,000 people and pray the rosary. So that there was something. That it wasn't like there was nothing. I mean, you see these videos of their processions; they're incredible. But it seems like there was something lacking, and it is interesting. I think you're right, William. I think it's a fascinating question. I think the study of the recent generations, I think, is really fascinating. Dad brings up the boomers, and I just think that it's an interesting thing to get into the psychology of why were these mass movements? Why was there a mass failure to see what was right? And you see these stories of our grandpa Dominic and Ina's grandfather also stood up at one point like, hey, no, we're not doing this. This is not the church. And they stood up and left. Bishop Ivarunas' dad. There are these stories, but boy, yeah, there are really few. And I know we're about to go. I'm really curious. Dad, you may have asked this anyway, but I'm really curious. Everyone who's watching, what other historical topics would you like us to talk about? I'm not sure I'm always going to be there, but I'd be really curious to hear everyone, because while we were talking about this, I think Dad brought up, I think Dad brought it up. Somebody brought up Luther, and it's just like, oh man, we should do a show about Luther, a deep dive into Luther, because that's talking about another super important time. I think Martin Luther, French Revolution, and Vatican II are maybe the three biggest monumental changes in the last 500 years. I doubt anybody would disagree with that. But let us know, guys. I mean, I think we're gonna get headed out here pretty soon. But what would you like us to talk about? And I would love to have on some of our historian friends.
Yes,
we may have to move it a little bit earlier or something for Christian, or I'll bribe him with some beer or something. I guess I could do that. But we do have other historian friends. I think Dominic, I guess, would be great to have on. Kenneth would be fantastic. We haven't had him on forever. It'd be great to have Kenneth on. But let us know. Yeah, what would you guys like to hear?
Yeah, at some point we need to talk about the intricacies of World War I. Of the fall of the Catholic Christian monarchies in Europe. I mean, also, if we're talking about things that we want to talk about, could always go to the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the Black Legend, how bad the English were. I could always talk about how bad the English were, but that's just personal opinion. But yeah, seriously, any kind of comments, we need stuff to talk about.
You know what I love about that? The how bad the English were. It's again, I can't recommend the book enough, guys. I love this book I'm reading about Edmund Campion. I think it's just called Edmund Campion by Evelyn Waugh. Really good. I think William, you'd really like it. And it just, I love it because he's really pro-Catholic. I mean, really, but a really good writer. And he brings up a kind of a point at some point where he's like, when they made these changes, when they dissolved the church, they lost a lot of the intellectual prowess of their country. Like a lot of their thinkers, a lot of their engineers, a lot of their, the doers left or were killed. So they went down, like they almost went to true dark ages. This is the incredible thing. And it happened in Germany after Luther. So you get rid of the monks, you get rid of your smartest people, and your country just goes boom. It's just it's a beautiful thing to actually see it. It's like, again, people are, there's another dark legend that the church is anti-science. It's like
no,
the church has studied more science than any other group in history by far. Yeah. They've had more breakthroughs. So really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another one. I think we could have 2 or 3 episodes on it and get some of our best minds together. And Mario Dirksen, the number one, would be let's start at October 1958, the death of Pope Pius XII, and roll forward and talk about just the mind-blowing part of how did we get from there to Father James Martin. But I mean, even just to the 1950s and 60s, how do we get to JP2 and talk through the names and places and people and events? I know we got books out there written by the Radecki brothers on this, and that's, I mean, it's a study all on its own. And I think that it's incredibly fascinating to go through. It's something that we want so much to capture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope to be doing soon. Well, okay, I shouldn't say hope. Well, maybe I could say hope. We were going to do a podcast when Bergoglio was supposed to die, but he didn't yet. So, but we are still planning that when he does with Mario and Louis Verrecchio. But maybe that'd be a good. I could ask them. That'd be interesting. It'd be asked to ask them come on to kind of describe the lead up to Vatican II or the after. I think you're right, Dad. That's a good 3 or 4 part series probably where you want to kind of set the table and then really talk it through, because it is really fascinating. And just the little bit that I've read too, I mean, just how interesting it is how the different countries were affected by it too. And that's another thing, that's another really interesting topic of how Germany and Scotland are very differently affected than America. And differently affected than Australia. They had very different effects. I mean, and it's really, I think that's a really fascinating part of our times to see that, America, which is kind of this little grunt, this little runt, I should say, the little baby of the Catholic Church, kind of was the one that really held the truth, for many reasons. And it's a fascinating another look at kind of the psychology of what people were thinking in the times and how it affects us now. Pretty interesting, yeah.
We have a Telegram group where the traditionalists, the different contributors all get together, and we had a discussion this week and kind of a spirited one over the church of the 1950s leading up to Vatican II. And like you were saying, Kevin, you have all these pictures of Corpus Christi processions that are huge, and rosary groups that are huge. And I mean, we know from Gallup that 75% of Catholics went to mass on Sunday, which, I mean, you compare that to now, it's hard to imagine. 140,000 priests or sisters or something like that, like tens of thousands, 100,000 or more sisters. But at the same time, and you had the #1 rated television show with Archbishop Sheen, but at the same time, things were rotting from within. And they were rotting at the clerical level. You had the communist infiltration. You had the AA 1025s out there. You probably had bishops that were starting to, obviously Montini and Roncalli were both suspected of modernism, and so you had kind of I like to compare it to a tree that is rotting from the inside, but still has all of its leaves. I think that's where we were in the 1950s. And that's another absolutely fascinating discussion of how did we even get to Vatican II? How did the church rot out from the time of Pope St. Pius X to the time of Pope Pius XII?
Yeah. And to like how much liberalism and the spirit of liberalism kind of undercut the Catholic Church from within, and of course, leading, culminating in modernism and the embrace of hedonism, which eroded the character of the Catholics more than attacking the Catholic Church itself, attacking the church from within, degrading it and rotting it, turning it into a whitened sepulcher, more or less, by the time Pope Pius XII died.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we don't. It's another great topic, the Industrial Revolution. I don't think we talk about that enough, because I think that really so much changed how the family structure worked, the city structure, the structure of societies as a whole were so deeply affected by the Industrial Revolution, and how once people got, I guess, comfortable enough, maybe that's part of what it was. Maybe they were too distracted. Maybe there's too much noise, almost literally, that they couldn't, pay enough attention to their faith. I mean, it's a really interesting question, because I think, again, we always think about it how, the martyrs had, they had the greatest, sufferings to deal with. But then you kind of look at our times and, well, they're pretty tough. I mean, how do you live as a Catholic in today's day and age? I mean, it's not easy. I think it's certainly harder mentally than I think ever. I mean, physically not, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we do need some physical scourges. I'm not asking for that. But I mean, it is interesting. Yeah.
It's kind of a cause of Dominic. Dominic likes to say that we're not going to really get healthy until we have had that scourge. So on Cardinal Spellman, publicly Orthodox, but question, he ordained McCarrick. Yeah. I honestly don't know. I think that really where I am is you have to hold all of them suspect. And it's almost like, we had the discussion today. Okay, you look at the news flow right now. They discover the Ark of the Covenant. They've discovered these big things underneath the pyramids that are supposed to maybe be, power generation or whatever. I forget, there's the 2 or 3 other big stories like that. I'm suspect of it all. And I think you really have to be. Now, it might prove out to be true. I don't know. But suspect. And with I hate to say, but even with Cardinal Spellman, who I think, has a pretty stellar public reputation. If I'm thinking of the right cardinal, but if I found out that he was privately a problem maker and was not on the up and up, or what, I hate to say, I wouldn't be surprised.
It's very, very hard to have heroes, modern heroes in this day and age, because every time, he was a hero and we can stand by everything he said. Then later, okay, never mind, he was a closeted modernist, turns out. It's very hard. It's very hard to have a lot of people, modern day people, to root for, which is why some people turn to Hitler. Just throwing that out there.
Yep.
But and you're totally right. It's just like, guys, there are so many other people that turn to why turn to Hitler.
King St. Louis IX.
I mean,
you can look to him as a role model.
Go to Franco if you're really desperate for a Franco was not great, but for goodness sake, he was better than Hitler. Even Mussolini, who I am not a fan of Mussolini, but he's certainly better than Hitler. I mean, come on, guys. This is pretty easy. There are not that many worse than Hitler. There are some. But let's leave it with the Hitler stuff. And I'm actually glad. Thank you for the comments. There were not too many people pushing that, which I'm a little surprised by. But I appreciate that, everybody. We did not get too down that rabbit hole. So
good comments. I did have to ban somebody right up front, but
made it easy for us.
Yeah, but no, I appreciate it. And there are probably there are a handful of questions here that I didn't put up, and it's just. There are a couple of really good questions where I just didn't have a good answer. I doubt that Kevin and William, and it was actually a little bit against the flow of the conversation at the time. I will make one real quick, because this is probably a something that, and I don't want to go into too much depth on this, because this is on Catholic Family Podcast, and we kind of try to avoid politics a whole bunch there. This was a question from earlier. If the euthanasia policy of Hitler, which is evil, is disqualifying for support, why does the same principle not apply to Trump and his support of IVF, abortion exceptions? Well, yeah, I mean, he does support IVF, and it's a horrible, terrible thing. And I think anybody who supported Trump regrets the fact that he supports IVF. But just look at what's going on right now in the UK. Okay, look at what's going on in some of these third world countries, and basically that's what would be going on here now if we had not voted for Trump, if we had had Kamala Harris. Definitely the lesser of two evils. Whether Trump turns out to be truly evil or just evil in some regards, is yet to be seen, I think.
Well, it's the lesser of two evils, right? I mean, if Hitler ran up against Stalin, and you're like, well,
that would be a hard one.
Yes, then you can give me that theoretical that, okay, maybe then that's a big time question, because I think even there are some questions about that you can't.
Poor people in Poland.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean that's just not it's not the same comparison. I mean, it's and again, I know, but I do think it disqualifies us from being Trump fans. I do agree with that. I think we can vote for him. I think we can, say when he does something right, which he has done some good things. But I also think we can't be like, Trump is the, I think even Trump bumper stickers, I think it's certainly iffy. I mean, I think that's true. And I think we need to think about that too, that if someone stands for these things, even mildly, even someone who's, immoral, I mean, you got to be careful with it. You got to be careful what you publicly support.
Eric on the Traditionalist had a good take on this, and basically said, we can't be complete 100% Trump, fan. I think we can be supporters to a certain degree, because he is the better of the two evils. But we can't consider him to be some messianic character, and it's one of the things I see. I don't think I really see that in our circles, but I do see it out there in the general public is people that literally, I mean, they'll use the phraseology that he was chosen of God, but they almost treat him like he's this messianic character because they're living for this world and he's doing some cool things like right now. And yeah, that's a mindset that I think we have to, for me, as far as I'm concerned, call out the W's when you get them because they're W's, but call out the L's, call out the losses like IVF, and say, yeah, this is unacceptable, and this is not something that any Catholic should tolerate.
Yeah, I think that it's easy to get a positive Trump derangement syndrome versus negative because compared to the alternatives, Trump is a great step up. That doesn't mean that in general he is a great step up. It's comparing the shinier of two turds. You don't have to love either of them. But compared to what we could have gotten and to what we had before, it is a monumental step forward. However, that doesn't mean that it's still, like in general, that in principle, it's a great step forward.
Yeah. I'll give one more quick analogy here, and then we'll kind of wrap up here and give some final thoughts. But I like to look at this 2024 election and say we were boiling frogs, just like in UK, Germany's kind of going down that same road. And basically, if you want to see us turn into Detroit, if you want to see us turn into South Central Los Angeles, keep on the same track because we are boiling and we are going to boil to death. We had to jump. We had no choice. We had to jump. Now, we might be jumping into the fire, and we might be jumping to safety. We might be jumping to safety with our hind ends scorched. I'm not sure exactly. We don't know yet, but we had to jump. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and Kevin, you want to give us some final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the end, I think we need to be careful what you think you know about history. I think it's really clear when even the rumor can spread that Pius XII was Hitler's pope, and it's like literally the opposite. It's not true. It was never true. It has only become part of the zeitgeist or part of what we know now because someone wrote it in a book as a fiction. So I think that's really important, that just because you hear something doesn't mean it's true, and really check your sources. I mean, it's a really good point. And I'm not saying everything I've said here has been correct either. I'm sure we all make mistakes and say wrong things, but I think that, someone is asking who's your favorite revisionist historian earlier. It's like, well, it's fine to read revisionist history. I think it's good to read, normal, encyclopedic history or whatever. I think, that's part of, what we need to do is to look for different sources and try to make our own conclusions. What makes sense? What seems to be the case? Because again, history is written by the victors. We don't really know what happened in a lot of cases. We just kind of have to do our best to find the truth. So I think, everything you read in history, try to, I don't want to say have an open mind, but be careful. I guess, and especially when you go down these rabbit holes of, oh, Hitler was a good guy. Well, just calm yourself down, pause a second and say, okay, what do I know to be true? What is something that is not even questioned? And there's a lot of these things that were evil from him. So it's like, okay, not a good guy, but again, you can also say the same thing. The Allies were not good. Did they bomb innocent, hundreds of thousands of people for no reason? Yes.
The terror campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah. It was terrorism. And so I agree. I think you got to be careful with all sides of it. And I think William said it really well earlier. Don't get on some kick and think it's cool. Don't think it's, oh yeah, I'm a fan of Hitler. It's like, oh, guys, just come on. It's just, it doesn't help. And especially as Catholics, promoting fringe ideas, especially stupid fringe ideas, is not helpful to you. And it's certainly not helpful to traditional Catholicism. And it just makes people who hold our specific position look like idiots. So please don't do that. And please continue to watch these shows and let us know again what topics you'd like to hear next. Because if there's anything I would get up at 1 o'clock for, it is a history discussion. So.
Right. William.
Yeah. Final thoughts. I agree with perfectly everything that Kevin said. Also, I would say for anyone who's listening right now who wants to understand something from history with a true perspective, the first place you should go is not YouTube. It's not listening to your favorite historian, your modern historian or whatever. I mean, I love a YouTube channel called Kings and Generals. I think it's great. However, if you want a true understanding of history and the nuances, you have to get as close to the sources as you can. You have to get as close to the people who lived through the times, who were writing through the times before the victors had a chance to come and clean up the record. Like if, for example, if you're gonna research the First Crusade, you should try to find the Gesta Francorum. It's written by one of the first crusaders. And the further away you get from the event in history, the more distorted it's going to get. We went from the immediate history of World War II and Hitler being Hitler bad, Stalin bad, war, to Hitler was going to take over the world, and it was the brave allies who had to heroically fight to stop him, and then went to German super soldier, Nazi bad guy, evil tyrant people. And it escalates from there, and then the true history gets distorted. So if you want a true knowledge of something, you have to get as close to the source as you can. So that'd be kind of my final thoughts on this chapter. Also, as a side note, to that gentleman who called out my Kimmerig flag, not only will I not iron it, I will maybe put a little crumple up in that top corner. So next time, so it will progressively get more and more crumpled as we go on. And that is how I will express my Welsh patriotism as an American citizen.
Yeah, I banned him. So
yeah, friend. We're all friends here, but don't make fun of my.
No, don't
Welsh
make
stuff.
fun of the Welsh. That's right.
Yeah,
or the state of your flag.
Yeah, come at me all you want, insult me, call me fat, but don't insult my flag.
That's right, exactly. All right, so my final thoughts here is that history is incredibly important. There's an old saying out there that he who owns the past owns the future. And I think for that reason, it's imperative that we understand history. And I think the one point, this kind of builds on what Kevin and William were both saying, that think about the story that hit today, that the CIA found the Ark of the Covenant. All right, that's the headline. Well, there's probably people, I haven't even looked into it yet, but probably people in the comments there saying, guys, you have no source material, you have no evidence, you're not showing us anything. This is probably a fake. All right. Guess who's getting more clicks?
Well, they actually have that. Sorry, I'm sorry. I just got to interrupt real quick. I'm just saying they have the evidence. They have the guys, the soldiers getting their
eyes,
their eyes melted and stuff. They trust us, guys. It was it was the real Ark of the Covenant.
It was the real Ark.
We're pretty sure. We're pretty sure.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but,
sorry.
But you see these stories out there, and guess who's getting more clicks? It's the guys who are being sensationalistic. And so I think that's one of the things that, when you see sensationalistic claims, it's like William is saying here, go to your original sources. History is beautifully three-dimensional. And it's one of the things that I know that you guys' mother tries to bring out in the Feast Day Quick Takes is that, saints have their warts and they have their flaws, and history is not always told in a straight line. And a lot of legends that we have are maybe true, maybe not. We don't know. But it's imperative on all of us, I think, to understand history and understand it in a true sense, warts and all, three-dimensional. So I think with that, I'm going to bring us all up and again, say something you said today earlier, Kevin, that for anybody who supports us, make sure that you like and subscribe. A lot of people that are putting comments out on the videos, really appreciate that. Kevin, like you said earlier, had a video that said that that any Patreon money that we bring in over, any new Patreon money, we're going to give to Father Geckel as a thank you for his doing reading the Goodyear Passion. And I would absolutely recommend that. Today is actually the 20th day of Lent. All right. And which I'm going to do, I think I'm going to do maybe starting tomorrow, starting Monday. I've listened to 2 chapters of the Goodyear Passion. I'm going to double up on that thing. I'm going to give up the rest of my social media, I think, and just go heads down and listen to the Goodyear Passion, because it's awesome reading and listening. So with that, I think
I'm sorry, Dad. One last thing. Guys, please go over and subscribe to the Traditionalists. If you're watching this on Catholic Family Podcast, that's where you can find more of this material. And we're going to be having merchandise soon for both channels. So soon for Traditionalists and for Catholic Family
Podcast. Yes.
We're going to have merchandise pretty soon. So pretty cool. So stay tuned for that. We'll probably not be super busy during Lent on either channel. The last two, I think everyone expects that. I mean, I think it's part of why we don't have that many viewers anyway. Everyone's not watching.
A lot of people gave it up for Lent,
which is fine. We appreciate that. But
Holy Thursday. Holy Thursday, we're definitely not going to have a live show, and I'm not sure we're going to have one the next 2 weeks either. So we're going to have to sit down and powwow this weekend and decide what we want to do the next 2 weeks. We'll
William and I are going to talk about Byzantium.
We're
gonna have a fist fight.
He'll be on tomorrow night talking about Byzantium.
I can go all day on that one. Let's go.
So until next time, everybody, thanks for joining, especially those of you who stuck to the end. And God bless, and we will see
almost 3 a.m.
in the next one.
Yep, Kimmery on Bith.